What is going on, everybody? This is your boy, Nathan Crankfield. Excited for another episode today of the CT Excellence Podcast. And I've got my new friend with me today, Bridget. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking me to be on today.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I've been super excited to have you. I always keep like a running list of people that I'm like, oh, this person would be a good podcast guest. You've been on my list for a long time. And so it's
Well, I
very good to be
appreciate
able to
that.
sit down with you today. Yeah, for sure. So first, I would love to just kick off. Like I told you just a moment ago, like I'm excited to learn more about you myself, and kind of like your motivation behind the stuff that you do on social media. I think we have a lot of similarities, and I'm sure a lot of differences too in our background and life and all kinds of stuff. And so yeah, just excited to hear more of your thoughts and more of, your backstory. But I'd love for you to just kick us off with that, just about who you are and where you're from and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. So, we mostly know each other through social media, right? Which is kind of
Sure.
always an interesting thing to me because do you really get the full picture of anybody through that
Mm-hmm.
situation? So it's fun to have an opportunity to kind of talk a little more about that. But I am a Midwest kid from Ohio, grew up here, only left to go to college. I went to Belmont Abbey in North Carolina.
Oh,
So
no way.
would love to go back to North Carolina at some
Dude, you and
point,
me
but my
both.
family's all here. Yeah, isn't it great? It's like all four seasons, mountains, beaches,
Yeah.
everything you want. But for now, my family's here. So I just got married on the 4th of July this past year,
Yeah.
expecting
Congrats.
our first.
You
So
right?
that
Big
happened
times.
fast, which is exciting, but lots of life changes right now. So that's kind
Sure.
of where we're at right now. My degree is in sports management, and then I have a double minor in business and English. So I kind of did all the things, didn't know quite where I was going to go with that. Did the corporate thing for about 6 or 7 years and never loved it, but it was just kind of that was the path that happened that way. And then with all the kind of craziness that has happened over the past couple of years, I ended up working for my dad, who's a financial planner. He and my brother are
Oh,
partners
wow.
now. So um, lots of perks with that, lots of interesting times when you work with your family.
Yeah.
I'm sure you
No
can
kidding.
imagine.
Yeah, definitely.
um, but that's been it overall. It's been really good. It's been an adjustment for sure, but I'm grateful to have them. And then I part-time do social media management as well,
Oh, okay.
which really just kind of came out of nowhere. I wasn't really planning on that. It just came from me doing social media and then people kind of asking for help. So it is very
Mm.
part-time, but it's been a good little extra source of income. So that's been nice too. So and then to my Instagram, I guess, which is sort of how you know me. I did not start it to be anything in particular. I just kind of started it to talk about the faith because I just love our faith. And then when things really got kind of crazy the last couple years, I just started sharing some opinions, which I just didn't do for any particular reason. And that's
Yeah.
when everything kind of took off and just kind of realized I don't want to say there was a market for it, but more that there were a lot of people feeling that way that just didn't have the voice to say it, I guess.
Voice
And
of the
so that's
courage.
kind of yeah, well, that's kind of well, I don't know, that's nice of you, but I'm kind of just my dad just says I'm a loudmouth, but anyway, I do have a lot of opinions, so that's kind of where that came
Yeah.
from, and that's how that all started, and it's just sort of taken off from there. So
That's awesome. And so
yeah,
tell me this, like for both your faith and your political, social perspectives, like have you always been pretty engaged in your faith? Like always been a huge fan of Catholicism or and then
so
same
I'm a
thing with
cradle
like the
Catholic.
like your social, political opinions on things. Like has that evolved or changed at all over
Sure.
time? Yeah, tell me about both of those.
Yeah, I think they've evolved more just in that I own them more now.
Mm,
I grew up a cradle Catholic. It was a huge part of our lives. I was homeschooled, so when I look back, I mean, I don't know that we ever did an official religion class in our homeschool. It was just sort of like it was just a part of our life. It was a huge part of our life. We went to
gotcha.
mass every day, did all of those things. So I think that to a large extent, it was just such a part of my life that I didn't really take the time to own it myself until I went away to college. And then it was challenged for probably the first time really in my life that I met a lot of people that thought very differently from the way that I thought or believed.
Yeah.
And when it was challenged is when I kind of had to start looking into it and be like, okay, what do I really believe this or is it just what I'm used to?
Yeah.
So I would say that's the biggest growth period in my faith was through college, just when it's challenged, that's when you find out if you really care about it or not, right?
Absolutely.
So that's kind of the faith side of things. As far as social, political kind of opinions, super conservative family. So again, grew up with that background, but again, was never really challenged on it until college. So that was a huge growth period for me, just as far as owning what my own opinions were. Um, I remember I thought I was going to be an education major, which um, for various reasons, I'm glad that didn't work out. But my
Yeah.
very first education class, very first one, our teacher started asking us about if we thought um, free college should be offered for illegal immigrants. That was like first question immediately, day one.
Interesting.
And I remember sitting there thinking, I disagreed with that, but nobody in the class said a word. It was just like, if she thinks that, then that's what we think.
It was
So
just silent.
that
Yeah.
was like my first introduction to like, wait a second, I don't think I agree with a lot of people on this. So
Yeah.
just kind of made me own it. So yeah, I would say college is kind of when I took that for myself.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, especially on social media or in colleges, right? There's a number of places in the corporate office, right? There's where it's just kind of it reminds me like the imagery of if you ever watched, and I don't know your opinion on the Chosen TV series, but like
I actually haven't seen it, but
oh
I've
really?
heard great things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay. I know there's a lot of hot takes between Catholics on the Chosen, but
yes.
I we enjoy it and I've watched all of it. And on the intro, there's like it's kind of cheesy and like kind of it's not like super well done the intro, but it's just basically like fish all swimming in one direction, and then you see like the Jesus is like a different colored fish and he's swimming in the opposite direction, like upstream,
Okay.
and then like
Uh-huh.
occasionally you see more and more switching directions. And I think that what that I think that represents too like our society today. Obviously, like living out your faith, and we can talk a little bit about how we think you and I probably agree on a lot of how our faith leads into our political beliefs. But I think, even just being willing to like speak up and share those opinions, really does swim upstream and like cause friction with people. And so like I'm just really interested to hear more of like what was your like you were just kind of like, oh, I want to talk about this today, and so you just like went off about something political one day, or like what made you decide to, because social media is definitely one of those places where like that class you're describing, everybody kind of is like synchronized. Everybody just kind of, even if there is like a crazy opinion and crazy stuff's happening out there, it's just like, yeah, we just kind of let it go. And, we just kind of move on and just like live with people thinking crazy stuff. But occasionally a
Right.
few of us are willing to be like, this is stupid, you know, and you're one
Right.
of those people who
Exactly.
says that. So what made you like decide to start doing that? Just kind of on a whim?
Yeah, so I think I've been doing it in my life for a while, and I'll give you an example of, again, I really feel blessed. I had a great foundation from my parents. They taught me kind of, you do what's right no matter what. Like I'll give you an example of when I was about 12, um, at the church that we were at for um, the Passion reading. You know how long the Passion Gospel is,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Okay, so Father said, everybody sit down because this is too long for everybody to stand through the Passion reading. So we're in a church of probably, I don't know, it was a huge church, probably 600 people or something. And we're up in the front, my mom, my dad, my brother, and I. And my dad said, we don't sit for the gospel. So the four of us are standing at the front of church, a church full of 600 people sitting down. So I will tell you that when I was
Wow.
12, I hated it. I mean, I was miserable. It
Of
was like
course.
everyone's looking at you, but it really did give me the foundation to be like, look, if you really think something is right, then you do it no matter if everybody around you is sitting down. And
Yeah.
that's totally my parents. I mean, I'm not taking any credit for that, but that is where the foundation started. And then really I just had the opportunities, like you said, working in the corporate world, you get a lot of pushback on things I never imagined. For instance, I left a job because they wanted me to support things that I didn't feel like I could support. I worked in Cincinnati, they call it Procter and God, but I worked for Procter and Gamble for a little bit. It's a big thing around here. So,
Yeah.
but I actually left there because it was, they wanted me to, for instance, come to a pride parade, those kind of things. And they pretty much tell you if you don't show up to those things, you're not moving up. This
Yeah.
is as far as you're going to go. So I think in my real life, I guess is the answer to that would be where it all started. And then in some ways, social media is an easier place to do that because you can block somebody or you can just ignore it.
Right.
But in real life, you can't do that. So I almost, not that it's not challenging at times, but it's almost easier on social media for me than it was in real life. But
Yeah.
I think as to why is really, there's a huge contingent on social media. I'm sure you know this right now, of what I would consider liberal Catholic women. I mean,
Mm,
a large portion of that. And it was almost hard to find people who have conservative worldviews and are Catholic in that space. So
right.
I think that was really the driving force for me, was like, someone needs to be a part of that movement. Not that it's just me. There's definitely others as well, but it's hard to find. So
For sure. Yeah, man, it's so interesting. I think yeah, there's a lot there. One, I want to say, did you know that I used to live in Walnut Hills?
I did not know that.
I did. Yeah,
So
it's such a
you probably
bummer.
know about the P&G thing then.
I do know about Procter and God for sure. Yeah, no.
Yes.
Yes, I used to live in Walnut Hills in like 2019 and 2020.
Oh my gosh, I did
Um
not know that.
yeah,
For a
basically August
job
to
or
August.
for?
I worked at Dynamic Catholic.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All
First job out
right.
of the army, I was at Dynamic Catholic. I was a parish
Oh,
consultant
that's
for a year.
awesome.
Yeah. And so I
Okay.
lived in Walnut Hills, went to St. Cecilia's,
That's so
loved
funny.
it. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. You
Yeah.
went to the young adult church, as I call it. That's
Exactly. Yeah.
the one where all the young adults
Everybody
go.
did. Yep. Yeah. The more
That's awesome.
Orthodox young adult church that you have St. X
Right.
downtown.
Yes.
Yeah. Downtown.
That's right. Those are the two
Yeah. It
options.
can get a little wonky every now and then.
Yeah.
But I love it. So I want to get into a lot of what you just said there, but I want to kind of introduce our topic that we mainly want to hit on today. We're going to talk about a lot of different things, but I really wanted to read this quote from, I just finished Live Not by Lies by Rod
Oh
Dreher.
yeah.
He also wrote the
Mm-hmm.
Benedict option, which I know a lot
Okay.
of Catholics are familiar with, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
interesting stuff here. And there's just this great quote that I kind of wanted to start us off with. And then we're going to go back to a lot of things you just shared. And so he says, the follower recognizes the cost of discipleship and is willing to pay it. This does not mean that he is obligated to put himself at maximum peril at all times or stand guilty of being an admirer. But it does mean that when the Gestapo or the KGB shows up in his village and demands that he bow to the swastika or the hammer and sickle, the follower will make the sign of the cross and walk with fear and trembling toward Golgotha. Fire, right? Obviously, that's some
Dang.
heat. I was lit when I read that. I was like, damn, I got it. Yeah, that's incredible. So I think it's really powerful
Yeah.
stuff. And I think, one thing that we were talking about was we were kind of like, brainstorming ideas. And this has been on my heart a lot recently, is this idea of like martyrdom, and I can get like, I don't even consider it pessimistic. I think it's hard to say you're pessimistic. Like the greatest saints in heaven, right, are like the martyrs. And so like to be pessimistic about like something that would lead you to like extreme sainthood is like kind of an oxymoron, right? Like doesn't work out. But I can be someone who like leans in the direction of thinking that we like legit will face some like substantial persecution in our
Mm-hmm.
lifetimes.
Yeah.
And what I'm interested about with social media is I think like the stat that I've recently heard, I've heard Jordan Peterson quoted, Ben Shapiro, a bunch of different people, Abigail Schreier, is that 62% of Americans are afraid to like voice their opinion of things that they think are not like popular, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like social media, like you've done it everywhere, right? So you've done it more than I have. Like you've done it with jobs, you left jobs, you've done it on social media. I'm sure you've done it with interpersonal conversations with people in person. You've done it in the university, you know what I mean? Or like in the classroom at times. And like, what do you think? Like, don't you think that like social media is it's the easiest probably, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's almost
Yeah.
like these levels to it. And people like we have an, like, do you think we have an obligation like of our faith? Obviously, I'm sure you do. That's why you left P&G. Like we have an obligation of our faith to leave jobs that are contrary to our faith and like our moral principles. But like if we can't even stand for it on social media, how do you get to the point of doing that?
Yeah, I think that is tough. And I have a hard time sometimes. You hear a lot of, well, I have no choice, or I had to do it, or, that kind of thing. And I think there are definitely situations where, in particular with the job issue, people have families to support, right? You can't always just be like,
Absolutely.
I'm out because I don't agree with everything. I think there are ways to still protest certain things while supporting your family. So that one's a little bit tough because it gets a little hairy with like you are called to support your family, right? So if
Yeah.
that's what you have, you have to make those hard decisions. But what I don't like is the saying like, I don't have a choice, because there's always a choice.
Right.
It just depends on the level of what, and I think the quote you just mentioned actually speaks to this a little bit, where it says, you don't always have to place yourself in maximum peril, I think, or something
Yeah.
along
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
lines is what it said. So like, we're not always called to just be like standing outside our house on a megaphone, like screaming at people what we think. There's
Right.
different situations and things like that. So we're not always called to just be like in your face about everything. There's ways, truth and charity, right? There's ways to say
Yep.
it and do it properly. But I do really think social media is one of the easiest ways, as much as it may not seem like it. I have a pretty thick skin, so it does not get to me too much when there are people I don't know. It's more
Right.
upsetting to me if people you do know
Absolutely.
say things like that. But I get messages all the time from women. I mean, seriously, every day, being like, I can't bring myself to say anything, or I'm afraid that this will happen, or that will happen, or this person will see it, or that person will see it. And
Yeah.
it's just crazy, because I think it's been bred into our society that there's a right way to think here, and you're not allowed to have another opinion. So
Right. Definitely. And I
so I
think, yeah, I can like feel myself getting worked up, which is good. I feel
yeah.
like I rant best when I'm worked up, but it just drives me nuts. I think it's one of my like things recently. I've been like really railing against like people pleasing.
Mhm.
But in social media and in the podcast. And it's because I think that that's one of the things that's really at the root of all of this. And it's an interesting vice that I think Catholics are especially susceptible to, especially Catholic women, I think, and I have seen.
Yep.
And it prevents martyrs. You know what I mean? It
Mhm.
prevents you from being willing to like truly die to yourself. And it's so
Yes.
insidious though, because it makes you think that you are dying to yourself when you're being a people pleaser, because you are like denying yourself in a sense, right?
Mhm.
But you're actually not willing to like be disliked. And the reason why I think social media is so easy is because if you're not willing to do it on social media, the majority of the people that I've lost on social media are not like close friends and family members. That
Right.
has happened to an extent. You know what I mean? Like I've
Mhm.
had friends distance themselves from me and things like that. But for the most
Mhm.
part, it's like people I knew in high school, right? Or people I knew in
Right.
college
Yeah.
that like we like kind of hung out or whatever, but like they don't want to hear the stuff I have to say. So they bounced and like awesome,
Mhm.
like who really
Right.
cares? But the majority
Right.
of like my close friends and family, I don't think I've really lost too many people. And to a certain extent, like the people who I have lost have changed in a way, and like their values and things have changed to the point that like we shouldn't even be friends, from his perspective or mine, or from her perspective or
Right.
mine. Like it just changes, right? And so I think, but it is such a great training ground. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to go on there like you and I doing,
Right.
intentionally create content that is,
Right.
obviously we're not intending to like rile people up, but intentionally create content that is bold and sharing the truth. But it
Mhm.
does mean, I think, like even just like sharing stuff here and there, because how many times have you heard from people be like, I felt like I was alone,
Mhm.
like I thought I
Yep.
was the only one who
Every
felt
day.
this
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
day.
Literally every day I get messages from people saying like, I did not know that. And I think what you said about Catholic women, especially, I sort of think I find that with like the Catholic liberal women movement, that it comes from a good place originally. I mean, the
Yeah.
idea of how they get there comes from a good place, out of compassion, and as women, we tend to lead with emotion a lot of times. Um, and so you see these people hurting or whatever, and you want to fix it. So it comes from a good place. But where we lose it is that policy doesn't usually good policy does not come from emotion. What
Yeah.
are the results actually of that happening? So I think you're right that as Catholic women, we have to be careful, because it's really easy to fall into like, these poor kids, we have to help every single one of them, and there's just a limit to what we can do in this world, right? So
Yeah. I was listening to
I think your
a
point.
really, really fun interview of two of my favorite people. I love when like two of my favorite like leaders connect. And so
Uh-huh.
Jordan Peterson was interviewing Dan Crenshaw. And
Oh,
so,
I bet that was great.
oh yeah, I loved it. It was like 2 weeks ago. It came out on Jordan Peterson's podcast. And Dan Crenshaw summed up like the way liberals versus conservatives approach change, and I really loved it. And he said that liberals are like the classic, like, when do we want it, or what do we want blank, like radical change, when do we want it
Mhm.
now? And he's like, and conservatives are like, what do we want? Incremental change. When do we want it in due time? You know?
Right.
And like, that is the patience that you can really see. And I'm sure you're married. We're preparing for marriage. We're just having a marriage prep, like wedding planning conversation right before this. And one of the things that is natural, you know, typically, stereotypically, and like psychologically and biologically to men and women, is that women are much better at focusing on like kind of things that do need to happen in the present, right? The people's present feelings, people like being more attentive to that, like caring about the things that need to happen today, as where the men are typically like more longevity thinking, right? And I see that so much. Like Emily's stressed about what's happening with the wedding. I'm stressed and thinking about and like filling out you know, mortgage applications so we can buy a house next fall. You know, like I don't really care if we don't have centerpieces at the wedding. Like I care if we can't. You know,
no one's gonna remember those, right?
Exactly.
I heard that a
I'm
lot.
like, what about that house? What about these other things, right? Like I'm planning all this other stuff for like a year from now, and it's a beautiful thing, but it obviously has its friction. And I think that's when we started to obviously like destroy masculinity, and we have a lot of effeminate men now. And I think you're seeing a lot of this, like, well, let's just fix everything right now. I'm always mind blown. Like I talk about this all the time. Like I follow Joe Biden and Kamala on Instagram and I love reading the comments, especially Kamala's, because Joe's will be like 50-50, but Kamala just gets torched, and it's incredible.
No one likes her.
No.
I almost feel bad for her if she wasn't so unlikable, but like no one likes her.
Yeah, zero people. It's pretty awesome. But I think one thing that's interesting about a lot of the comments are always like pay off the student loans. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, and it's been like that for like 9 months. You know, and I'm like, you really wanted them to do that immediately. Like you had no other priorities.
They thought
like,
day one.
Yeah. And it's like, man, like they really want just like mind blowing, like rapid, massive change immediately. And it's pretty crazy to see.
And in a country this size, to think that that's the way things are going to work is almost right. Yes.
Yeah.
And I know people that voted for them just specifically for that exact reason, for the free college, which is not, I guess it's a little amusing that now they're seeing that does not just happen overnight. So
right. Absolutely not.
But I'm curious because you're a convert, right? So I'm just curious, how does that, is your family like, how do they deal with that? I'm just curious how they dealt with that.
With me being Catholic?
Yeah. Were they supportive of that, or?
Yeah, I think for most of my family, me being Catholic was a lot easier than me being conservative.
I really
had conversions in both. Yeah. So I think so for my mom's family, I would say me being Catholic is more can be more of a friction point. It's not much of one. It's very, very little and very rare that it's ever a thing or brought up. Like my wedding will be like the next time that it's like kind of a thing for any of them. And especially it was more of a thing when I was like graduating from like 8th grade and high school, and like we had like mass with a lot of like school events or my college graduation, things like that. But the wedding will be kind of the next one. Then my dad's side, a lot of them are like some are like pretty hard Democrats, some are just like not conservative. And there's some liberal people on my mom's side as well. But yeah, I think they've all been pretty open to me being Catholic, because I don't think many of them are like staunchly whatever they are, you know, which I feel like is so common. I've had a lot of, obviously, like many Protestant friends over the years, and they seldom will try to like talk me into not being Catholic, because it's kind of just like everything's the same. You just kind of go to whatever feels right to you.
Yeah,
you know?
People don't know what they believe, including Catholics. I'm including
Catholics
and that, but people really, it's very few and far between where you find people that actually know what they believe. And
absolutely,
I think that's one of the things that I think we would be a lot better, even in this country, with debate if people actually knew why they believed what they believed.
Yeah.
I find that to be one of the biggest issues, is why we always have so much friction, and it's so much just kind of back and forth, because it's a lot of, well, I read this in a meme and I read this in a different meme, and that's what you're fighting over, instead of like what are the actual issues, and actually knowing why you believe what you believe. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and it's something that always blows my mind. I just did a series on why I'm Catholic. And I think, you know, one of the things that's always interesting to me is that more Protestants don't like dive deeper into that. I'm surprised that more Catholics and Protestants don't, but I give Catholics the like benefit of the doubt on the fact that like they can like accurately assume that there is stuff out there that proves that, you know, like I think I just had somebody ask me the other day, it was kind of somebody who was fallen away Catholic, a friend of mine from college, and he's recently married, and he's like, you know, we I don't think they got married in the church. And he was like, yeah, we're kind of like venturing back, and I really feel it's calling. He listened to the podcast, so he was like, do you have any like resources or books recommendations? I had like 7, right? Like I'm like, just woke up, you know what I mean? Like I throw him 7 books in order of what I recommend, the pros and cons of each. And it's like, there is no like why we're Elevation Church, but there is a why we're Catholic, by Trent Horn. There is like, there's 2,000 years of that stuff. But there is no like, why we're Transformation Church or why we're Bethel. Like that doesn't exist. And there's a reason for that, right? And because they can't write the book, right? Like there's no way you can't write it.
Right.
Like,
who actually does know the answer to that, right?
Exactly.
Probably not even their leaders. So
So we'll just write some like fun other like cute book, that's more like Rachel Hollis or something.
We'll just have a concert today and everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. Just great music and nobody asked deep questions. But I want to jump back to something you said there that I thought was really important, was the emphasis on choice. Because this is like so central to seeking excellence, is people understanding that they have choice in life. And the media, the progressives, like they try to like squash that out for all of us, right? And it's just like, you're a woman, so like you don't have the choice, like you're oppressed and you don't have any choices, and like you have to believe this, like you have to be pro-choice and you have to be this, all these other things, right? I'm a Black man, I have to believe all these other things, I have to be like supporter of BLM and all this other crap. And like it always makes me think of when people are just like, well, I don't have a choice, I have to do this. And how often we hear that with the vaccine and with many other things, right? Over the last 2 years, of people just kind of going along with gender ideology, CRT, teachers that don't believe in it, all these different professions that are just kind of going along with things. And it just always makes me think of, on a much smaller scale, obviously, I'm not trying to be, exaggerating this, but it reminds me of what the Nuremberg trials must have been like, where you had, these German leaders who supported Nazi leadership, and they just executed orders, right? Did these horrific things, and they just were executing orders. And I'm like, how far would people be willing to go for that? As I learn more and more about like the insidious nature of Anthony Fauci, if you learn about like George Soros and Bill Gates and like these big actors in the world, right? Like you just have to wonder, all these other people who, granted, don't know as much as we probably do, right? Because they don't read or listen to the things that teach us these things, but still, like one of Jordan Peterson's like 12 rules for life in his second book, is 12 more rules, is like, don't do anything that you hate. And he's like talking about like, when you do things that you don't agree with, this eventually you start to hate yourself, and it's the most miserable existence. So why do you think what do you think it is? Like, where do people draw the line? Do you have the fear that like what's your expectation of the future, I guess? Like, do you think if we do face persecution, like we're just losing 90% of the church and conservatives, or where do you think it goes?
Yeah, I think it's a big question. I think the first part of that is kind of, do people have a limit? And I do think so. I have my issues with Trump, like everybody else, right? But one of the things I think he did really well is he got people who didn't care before to care. He was kind of good at getting people to care just from speaking to people in a way that politicians normally don't. Right. So that's one of the things I really appreciated about him, and I think some of that has carried over into even the presidency now, that a lot of people, I know for sure, a lot of people that did not care before that do now. So I appreciate that. But I think as far as the church getting smaller, Pope Benedict actually said that. I believe there's a quote from him.
Oh yeah.
I don't know the exact quote, but he said something along the lines of, the church is going to get very small, and we're not going to have the social privileges that the church has now, and all those things. And I actually recently posted something about that, when you get to where you have to answer on your final judgment day, right? It's not going to be the Pope answering for you. It's not going to be your employer answering for you. It's going to be you answering for you. So that for me is a huge driving force of like, who's actually standing in front of God on that final day and having to say, well, I didn't have a choice, because I do not want to be that person. But I don't think people think of it that way. We have a very earthly mindset, which I fall into all the time too. And I think in the end, like you said about the church getting small, it usually is a small percentage of people that are willing to stand up. I believe the stat for the American Revolution was like 9% of the people total fought at all. Right. So I think that's,
and like 20% wanted it, right? It's like,
right. Yeah. Like no one else even wanted it.
Don't do this. Just stay
or didn't
for the
care.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Man.
Yeah. So the comfort the comfort level, like you said, that is a huge driving force for people. And I don't know how I don't know that you're ever going to get a majority to stand up to things like that, but I don't think that you need a majority,
Yeah.
because again, like, a lot of people are willing to go along with it. So if you have enough voices that are willing to fight back, you may get some people following along with you. But I think, like you said, you can't be a pessimist in the church, because we know who wins in
Either
the
way,
end.
it's a dub.
So
Yeah.
right, we're kind of called to be optimists in a way if we're Christian. But I do see the the church getting very small, as Pope Benedict said. So I do kind of think it's going to go that way. But I do think that you'll also see great leaders rise up out of that, because I think you always do when hard times come, you see some really great leaders rise up out of that.
Yeah.
And I think we have a few now, but hopefully some more out of our church would be great. I'd
That would
love to
be
see a
awesome.
little more of that.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. I think, one of the things I think is like the critical, like, foundational question of like recognizing that we have choices, just really, are you willing to suffer?
mhm.
Because I see so often, same thing, like the reason why I say it's so core to seeking excellence, to recognize that we have choices, because how many times do people say, well, I don't have time to go work out because I didn't have any time this week. And it's like, you did. Like, did you watch TV? Did you BS on your phone? Did you, go to
Mhm.
bed when you should have? Did you spend time, in conversations that you could have not been in, wasting time at work?
Right.
There's so many different things. If you're honest with yourself and you do that evaluation, I didn't have time to pray. I didn't have, and it's like, no, you chose not to. And for some of that
It's all
stuff,
about
right? Like,
priorities, right?
yeah, if you choose to not go to the gym, like that's okay. For if
Mhm.
that's what you choose, but own
But
that.
own
Like,
it, right?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I
Yeah.
chose to watch TV, and sometimes I do that, right? And like sometimes we have,
Mhm.
like sometimes you should, like
Yeah.
you should sometimes choose to watch a football game instead of going to, like, it's okay to like relax and rest and do these things. Like, I chose to go like have coffee with a friend instead of going to daily mass. Like, obviously you don't want to do that forever, right? And just like never go to mass, but like a
Right.
daily mass isn't an obligation. And like sometimes it's good to, if
Mhm.
your friend's in town or something, like it's okay to choose that. But then at the end of the week, be like, that's
Right.
what I chose to prioritize this week. But I feel like so often people don't want to recognize that, like, sometimes in order to do more, you have to suffer or like give up something else, right? Like, you don't want to say,
Mhm.
okay, I'm going to add this into my schedule. What am I going to take out? And in
Mhm.
a similar way, we want all these like great things and like the fruits of the Holy Spirit and like the beauty of our faith. But like Jesus asks us, are you willing to suffer? And if you're
Right.
not, then you're not going to make it. And I think we don't, like, for so long, and I'm not somebody who's like super anti-Vatican II, but I do think like since then, like the spirit of Vatican II has suppressed this, like a lot of the messaging around like this is supposed to be hard and it's going to be, and
Mhm.
like nobody anymore is
Yeah.
going to skate by with like easy paths to heaven. Like, we're just out of that time. And like, it's like, sorry, like I'm sorry that you can't have it the way that it used to be, but
Mhm.
this is what we have now. And like, are you going to be a part of this or not? And I think a lot of people are not ready to like actually embrace that.
Yeah, so I think it's been a while, right, since we as our generation has never really had to face any real hardships, I would
Right.
say. At least I'm speaking for myself. I can say, there's things I could pick out in my life that were difficult times, but as far as any real true hardships, I couldn't tell you what that would be for me. Um, but I think that it's really already happening. We're getting back to the martyrdom concept here. It's already happening in other countries, right? Christians are being
Right.
persecuted and killed for their faith every day.
Absolutely.
So I don't know that it'll be our generation, but if not, it'll be our kids. If things don't turn around from the
Yeah.
direction that they're going. So I don't want to be, it's not like a pessimist either, but I do think that that's a real possibility. Now, I do think there is traditionally, right, there's I think it's called red martyrdom is when you die for your faith, and then there's a white martyrdom, which is just when you're standing up for your faith and you're going to face persecution in your
Like
life,
suffering. Yeah.
which I have a tendency to think is more likely what we're all going to face at this point.
Yeah.
But who knows, right? We've seen how fast things can change. And
Yeah.
I try to ask myself this. I try to say this in my prayers in the morning. I don't want to suffer. I just want to throw that out there. Like, I'm not excited about
Yeah.
it. So like that is not where I'm at, but I pray for the grace to want to suffer, because the saints did, right? They prayed
Right.
for the opportunity to have that suffering, and I'm just not there yet. But I also pray for the courage that if it comes to that, I try to put myself in that position. What would I do? You know, I want to
Yeah.
say like I will stick by my faith and I will stand by my principles. But have we really been faced with a challenge that's so tough yet where I have had to make that call? And for me, because my feelings don't get hurt that easily, I guess, I don't think I've ever had a challenge in my life yet that was like, gosh, I don't know what to do here. But I do think it could get there, you know,
Right.
especially if they're coming after your family or whatever that is.
Yeah.
What are you willing to give up? And I think it's worth thinking about now before you're faced with that
Oh, you have
decision.
to think about it ahead of time.
And yeah, and putting yourself in
I don't think there's
the
been any
mindset of like,
martyrs, or at least very few, who have been like on the spot, make the
right, like,
change.
oh, I guess
Yeah.
I'll be a martyr. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I do
Yeah.
feel like dying today for my faith, like, yeah,
I didn't
beat the hell
yesterday,
out
but
of me.
today I guess it's fine.
Yeah, beat
Yeah,
the
it's
hell
fine.
out of me just for not
Yeah,
stepping
the
on that statue of
torture,
Mary. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
stories they tell about the torture are worse for me. I'm like, if you're just gonna shoot me, like, go for it. But if
Yeah,
it's
I'd
gonna
be
be
all for it.
torture, I got a whole other thing there to go. So anyway, my point there is just spend the time now before you're faced with any of those things. Kind of put yourself in those positions and really pray for the courage and the strength to, if you are put in those positions, to be able to make that choice. Like you said, it's going to come down to
Yeah,
a choice even with that. So
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I wrote down so many things there, but I want to go back to like thinking about, I think it's interesting thing. I think and some, I say this too, like we say it's like, I don't want to be pessimistic. And sometimes I think it's just being realistic. And I find myself
mm,
saying this all the time. I think it's almost one of the like subconscious things that even those of us who believe this stuff can fall into, of thinking that it's negative. Because like we said, we've admitted, it's kind of like an oxymoron saying it's negative, because it's really not. Um,
hmm
but still, like, we kind of have this like natural inclination to be like, oh, we're pessimistic if we think that things are going to be bad. And I think we
right.
just have to be realistic. Like I think this is a funny story. We laughed about it really hard when I was in infantry school. One of my
Uh-huh.
friends had gone to basic training. It's kind of a dark joke, but I'm going to tell it anyways. And
Okay.
he
I'm
was,
always up for a dark joke, so go for
yeah.
it.
So we have these Kevlar helmets, right? And it's like what you wear when you're in combat and things like that. You train in them and everything. And so when he was in basic training, some privates in the army are great. They're the most talented, greatest like kids in the world. Some of them are absolute idiots. And so some of them are arguing as to whether or not the Kevlar helmet is bulletproof. And they're like going back and forth, like yelling at each other. One's like, yes, it is. It's bulletproof. And the one's like, no, it's not. You're an idiot. And eventually the drill sergeant came over and was like, privates, listen up. If you get shot in the head, you will die. Like, they just all like erupted in laughter. And one of my friends, Wes Duff, used to tell all the time, and he's really funny and goofy, and he would tell us a story. And he would
Uh-huh.
just like, whenever we were kind of down, he'd just be like, if you get shot in the head, you will die.
You will die.
Yeah, it's like that's not pessimistic, right? Like that's just this is
Right.
reality, right? Like it's just like
Right.
if
This is
we
the answer.
yeah, and I kind of view that as the same way as like if we have socialism in America, you will suffer. You know what I mean? Like
hmm
your church will be like under government control. Like we will be underground.
Right.
Things
Yeah.
are gonna be bad. Like
Yeah.
that's not
It's realistic.
pessimism.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that
Yeah.
sometimes people view that as like a negative thing, but I just think that that's kind of like we need to like recommend like have people recognize what that's going to take, or what's going to happen if that happens. But I think the other
hmm
thing that I think is always interesting, I've always been intrigued by how people dog the apostles, right? Like we love to like
mm
talk about like Peter denied Christ 3 times and Judas was so terrible, he sold Christ out. And it's like, how is that like, do you know what percentage of people today would have done much worse? Like Peter
Right.
denied
Oh, for
Christ
sure.
3 times and like still stuck around. Like people today would have been like, out, like I'm out of town. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like most of
Yeah.
us would just fully bounce. I mean, Judas like selling him for money. It's like, don't we do the same? It's the same thing with you talking about, the jobs and stuff like that. How many people
hmm
could legitimately leave their jobs that they're morally, compromising on and choose not to? Isn't that a small example of selling Jesus out for silver?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I mean, just an example of that, I guess, is we were about to get married and Alec was a special education. My husband was a special education teacher.
Mm,
Um, and it just had gotten to the point where it was like he either was going to have to do the things that they wanted him to do or he was going to have to leave. Those were kind of his options.
yeah, the
And his
choice.
last week there, they had a critical race theory training,
Mm,
and they had all the teachers sitting in an auditorium, every teacher in this high school, and they asked them, the leaders said, who here doesn't think this country is racist? And he was the only one to raise his hand out of a
damn,
whole entire high school of
legend.
teachers. But after the meeting, about half of them came up to him and said, "Thanks for doing that. We wish we could have, but," and he was like, "You know what? I'm out of here. Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, miss me
Nobody
with
is
that.
willing." Yeah, I'm gonna be the only one here that's willing to say anything. And it does, you wish that that would start a chain reaction. But anyway, point of that is he left that and is now starting a career as an insurance salesman, which is great, but it takes some time to get off the ground, right? So right
Yeah,
now we're definitely having to pinch pennies. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. And he would have had he had cushy benefits there. He had all of those things, but what can you put up with? What are you
yeah.
willing to give up? But I
What's
think an
that worth?
example
Yeah.
even closer to home is, I don't know if you saw this, I talked about it the other day, but how much money the USCCB is taking from the government.
Mm-mm. I didn't
So
see you
speaking
post
of
that.
selling, yeah, so I believe the stat is between 2008 and 2015, the USCCB received $2 billion from the federal government for refugee resettlement. So over the
Wow.
span of 7 years. And then I want to say it's something like last year, or 2019 is the last time they have it reported. It was something like 52 million in grants in a year. So I would say that's an even closer example to selling Jesus out for money. Now
Yeah.
you could argue with me on that one, but I think that the USCCB, you see a lot of what they do jive with the government. And if you want to know
Yep.
why, you usually follow the money. So I think you're right that we want to think we would never be those people. We would never be the apostles. We would never do that. But if you put yourself back in their position, it was almost crazier for them. Like Jesus is walking among them and they're like, hold on a second, everyone thinks they're crazy. It's
Yeah.
be really easy
And
to
you
sell
just
them
saw
out at
him,
that
yeah,
point in time.
get the absolute snot beat out of him, and now
Right.
they're
Yeah.
they're like, "Don't you know him?"
See
And he'd be
ya.
like, "Hell
Yeah.
no." You know what I
I
mean?
don't know him.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's wild, man. And I think people don't
Yeah.
recognize that. And we don't have this. There's another funny story that Emily told me of one of her coworkers went outside. His kids were like about like tying up the one, like he has like five boys, right? And they were like tying up the
Oh,
one
yep.
boy, like doing
Sounds
like all this
about
stuff. And
right.
he was like, "What in the world are you doing?" They're like, "We're playing
Yeah.
martyrs." Right. And it's like, it's
Oh.
amazing, right? It's like the greatest story in the world. And you love to see it, but
Yeah.
like that's the kind of view I think we have to have, right? It's the same thing as like obviously we both of us, I think we would agree, like we're not at places where we're like desiring suffering, but at the same time, like I do have this just like heroic view. And you remember before when we prayed before we started, like I always pray to St. Thomas More beforehand, and just like
Hmm.
the last like 4 months of my life, he's really like just been like top of mind for me. And I really want
That's
like his
awesome.
like
Yeah.
classic photo, to like be in my office one day and like have a really nice
Yeah.
image of it, because I just think I'm like, man, like who's a better, I've always wondered and like sought after like who would be like my patron saint. Obviously, I love Saint Joseph. We love
Hmm.
like Saint John Paul II. It's Emily's
Hmm.
favorite saint. And I was like, man, I feel like I don't have like a saint homie, like I got a bunch of
Right.
like I've
Yeah.
kind of like dabbled in. And just like I've been praying about that for like the last year. And then like at the end of the year, like St. Thomas More just like top of mind, like he was just constantly coming up.
Hmm.
And I'm like, who better for me, like and all the stuff that like I believe in and want to stand for.
Right.
Great defender of traditional marriage, a martyr, a layman.
Yeah.
So just awesome dude. But I'm like, that's the kind of stuff like we need to be like honoring and like, and JP2 is a great example of this too, like a staunch defender of freedom, and stood up against communism, almost got killed for it, right? They had an attempt on his life.
Hmm.
But I think we have to like heroically, like those kids did, like heroically look up to these heroes and be like, we do want to emulate them. Like I always kind of make like the half joke of my bottom half of my sleeve is Jesus and Mary. And I'm like, I don't want there to be like any, like I can take my necklace off. You know what I'm saying? But
Hmm.
I'm like, if they're coming
Yeah.
around like cleaning up the Catholics, it's like I want it to be like I am it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
take me. Yeah,
Yeah.
And obviously I'm not saying everybody should go do that, and that's not the only reason I got those tattoos, but it is part of it. And
Sure.
I legitimately thought about that when I was like suffering the pain of getting them, of like,
Hmm.
if I have to, like, if they force me to take these off someday, you know what I mean, if I like lose my
Yeah.
arm because of this, like if things get insane,
Uh-huh.
I'm like, good, like let it happen.
Yeah.
And I think we have to like
I
have that kind of like approach similar to soldiers, that are like willing to
Sure.
die for it, like to really build that up and be like, we legit are the church militant. Like you might lose your life for this.
Yeah, I think there's something you said in there too that is good to point out, which is that we're both saying we don't really want that necessarily, but in a way, you know, you like St. Thomas More, he had so much to lose, right? I don't think he wanted
Yeah.
that. he wasn't excited about it. He had a
No.
really, prestigious position. So not all the saints were just sitting around waiting like somebody come and kill me for my faith.
And he
They
had
were
a
living
family.
in, yeah, and he was living in the world, I mean, he had a political position. So I think it's something important to remember, because I think we do lose sight of the fact that we need people out in the world doing these things too. Nothing wrong with being
Mhm.
in ministry, or,
Right.
having a vocation priesthood or anything, but I think it's important to remember, because I get a lot of people saying like, I don't really know how I can change anything. I don't know how in my life I
Yes.
can do anything. The saints lived out in the world, they
Right.
had these
Yeah.
kind of jobs, and they weren't looking for persecution, but it found them because of the way that they lived and the way they believed. So I think that's just important for people to remember, because I think they lose sight of, they think if they don't work in, youth ministry, then they don't make an impact. But you do, in everything that you do, people notice. So
Yeah. And think about, I mean, every excuse that we've listed for why you could even like actually like rightfully discern to not, cause trouble in the world,
mm,
like St. Thomas More had. Like
yeah.
he was a
Yeah.
father, he had kids, he had a wife to take care of. My man went to law school, like he like grinded to get to where he was. Then he worked his way up.
Mhm.
Yeah, he did have a prestigious position. Even think about the rationalization of people trying to talk him out of it and just be like, dude, like he literally just wants you to like sign something,
Mhm.
and he just
Yeah,
wanted
it's no
like
big
King
deal,
Henry,
right?
yeah, King Henry VIII just wanted him to sign like this agreement that like he was getting divorced and wanted to marry somebody else, and he wanted him to be like, this is a valid marriage, and he's like, I will not do that. And it's like, think about it, like if you're St. Thomas More friend and you're trying to talk him out of it, it's like he's still going to go through with it whether you do
Mhm.
it or not. You know what I mean? Like you're
Mhm.
not going to change anything. He's still going to be the head of the church in England. Like your family's still going to have to live on without you, and he's like, it's not worth it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
well,
so
and
savage.
look at what it did change, like you think in the
Exactly. I mean, we're
moment, what
talking
is it
about
gonna matter? But yeah,
this is a long
exactly.
time ago.
So in the moment you think this is a small thing, this is, I'll just do it and get by. But in the long run, it does matter. All those the small things are really what builds you up to be able to say no to the big things, right? So
Yes, absolutely.
so that
And
is
so,
important.
so yeah. So talking about that, like, how do you handle? Obviously, you get a lot of negativity and pushback, but like talking about suffering, and small things preparing us for greater suffering, and small things preparing us for bigger tasks. Like, how do you kind of process like the days where you get a lot of nice messages?
Yeah. It's funny because usually you start to figure out, and I'm sure you have some of this too. You start to figure out, I'm going to post this and I know how it's going to go
Oh
over.
yeah,
I know what I'm going to get. Um, and I think you do start to attract an audience that wants to hear what you have to say. So that is
yeah,
actually, in a way, it's
yeah. It's
lessened,
at the
but then every
beginning it can
time,
be tough,
yes,
but
yeah,
you kind of like
yes.
weed it
And that's
out.
actually right. And that's actually
Yeah,
part of the hard part when people are starting out, which is why it's always hard to tell people like just start, because it's going to be a little tough at the beginning. That's when you got a lot of people that you are weeding out. But then
absolutely.
anytime you hit a growth spurt of any kind, you kind of get the same thing. So I think that
Yeah.
the biggest thing for me is, again, when they're strangers, it's a little easier for me to push that off. But actually, I don't know if you know who Melody is from the Essential Mother. That's her
I
her
don't think so.
Instagram name. She's great, but she's actually hard to find because she's shadow banned a lot. But she kind of taught me that it's okay to block people. It's okay to, like, I've limited my comments to only people who follow me.
Mm,
And some of that is just a matter of protecting your peace. You don't owe people on social media anything, which I think is like kind of a hard concept. You start to feel like you do owe them something.
right.
And the reason I did that was because sometimes people find you through a hashtag. They don't follow you. It's the only post they've ever seen. They don't know your heart. They don't know anything about you.
Yeah,
And then they'll say something nasty that'll ruin your day. And it's like, that's just not worth it to me. If people follow me and they have something constructive, I'm all about having a constructive conversation. I love when people challenge me on things that makes me think. But if it's just there to say a nasty comment, it's not worth it. So I guess my main thing on that is, on social media, don't be afraid to block people or set
oh
boundaries
yeah,
for your peace. I have no problem with that. I think I did used to have a problem with it because I thought it was sort of restricting people having their opinions, but it's not. It's just that they can still have that opinion, just not not in
yeah,
a
like your
nasty
comments.
way
Yeah,
towards me.
yeah.
But I think in real life, again, it's actually harder because you don't want to
Oh, definitely.
alienate people, your family, your friends. So you do have to approach it in a different manner. But the other thing I would say about that is you change a lot more minds by having a relationship with people first. So I
Yeah.
don't think you have to come in all guns blazing with everyone you meet and being like, look, this is the way it is. You build that relationship on things you have in common first. And then when those sort of topics come up, that's kind of when we have those conversations in friends and family situations. And I have had some friends distance themselves and even some family over those things. Typically, I'm not even the one who brings it up. Typically, it's
Yeah.
them, but then it kind of ends up with them distancing themselves. But I've learned to be okay with that as long as I treated it respectfully, the situation respectfully. So I think if you make sure that you treat the situation the way that you think it should be treated and you speak the truth in charity, then if people stick around, great. And if they don't, that's okay too. And you do kind of have to learn to be okay with that if you're going to speak your mind.
Right. Yeah, no, 100%. And I think one of the things that's beautiful with even the kind of like refinement, right? So it's so funny talking about how like, yeah, you lose a lot of people over time, but then you have like big pushes. It's so funny, right? So
Yeah.
I
Uh-huh.
always I'm always laughing about that because I don't often like check my insights or things like that, but I do think it's entertaining sometimes to see like I'll have 200 people follow me, but I've only gained like 12 followers because I've had
Right.
188 unfollow at the same time.
You made a lot of other people mad, so they're all
Yeah,
gone.
exactly.
Yeah.
So they bounce, and sometimes they'll come because like I post some like funny stuff for a few days and like random things, and then
Mm-hmm.
I start
Yep.
talking about like BLM, and everybody's gone, right, and it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. But I think one of the
Yep.
beautiful things of it is it's very humbling, and it keeps me honest, and it helps me to be like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing this for. I don't have like a dream. If I had 100,000 followers one day, great, but it's not like my goal,
Right.
right? Like I don't write that down as like my dream or goal.
Right.
um and so that's not why I do it, right? Like I do it because
Mm-hmm.
like now my point is to really strive to encourage and bolden and form the people who will have those kind of interpersonal conversations with people, and they might not be willing to do it. And I think the way that we help with that, and this is what just segues into one of the last questions I want to ask you, is one of the main reasons why people don't evangelize, one of the main reasons why people don't stand up for what they believe in politically, is they don't feel like they know enough to actually
Mm-hmm.
answer the questions, right? And so, what has been your process of like learning, or like what do you do for like ongoing education on these things? Because you talk about a lot of different topics, and I try to talk about a lot of different things as well, and it's tough. I mean, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of stuff out there. You can get hit with some other things, and people bring up other topics, and it's like you kind of have to know your areas of weakness or your areas
Yes.
of expertise. You know what I mean? But
Yes.
how do you? Yeah. Where do you go to learn?
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think, like you said, as soon as you put something out there, all of a sudden somebody has a stat you've never heard before, you've never read before, because we're not experts, right? We're putting out what we've found and what we've
Absolutely.
researched. So one thing I would say is that don't be afraid to say, hey, I was wrong about that. I've had to do that a few times. Like, hey, I was wrong about that. And I think people have a really hard time doing that because you want to look like you know what you're talking about. And I mean, I don't love it either, but there are times
Yeah,
where
no,
you
it's
just
not
have to
fun.
say, hey, I screwed up. And what I've found through that is when you do, people actually end up trusting you more because they know that if you do find out different information or better information, that you're not going to be afraid to be like, hey, I was wrong. Here's what it is. But that's just a little plug for don't be afraid to not know everything because you won't, and no one does. Um, but the way that I try to find things out, typically I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm doing busy work or whatever. So that'll get me started on a topic, and then I will start researching it. And I don't remember where I heard this quote, but it's something like, in the age of information, ignorance is a choice. So I don't think that means you need to be an expert in every single thing, but I do think that means that if there's a topic that's interesting to you, go learn about it. Like, there is everything you could possibly want to know on the internet or on a podcast or in a book. You can
Definitely.
find out anything you want to know these days. So if we're not constantly learning, then I don't think we're doing what we're called to do, really. Now, I do think that looks different for people in different stages of their life. Like for you and I right now, we don't have kids right now. We have a lot more dispensable time, I guess. Not that we're not busy, but you know what I mean. There's not
No, for sure.
somebody demanding our attention. So that's going to look a little different in different seasons of your life. But there's nothing stopping you from listening to a podcast every day or something along those
Right.
lines. Again, it's a choice, it's a priority. So So I would say for me, the main place that I find out my information is podcasts, just because that's the easiest form for me to be doing something else and listening.
Sure.
But a topic will just sort of like catch my attention, and then I'll just sit down and do some research on it and try to make some notes. So I think that's sort of another thing, is don't be afraid to share that with people. Like you said, that is a huge reason why people don't say anything, because they're like, I just don't know enough. And sometimes all you need is 2 or 3 facts. And I can probably bet you the other people probably don't have 2 or 3 facts, because
Yeah, they just
again,
have an
people don't
opinion.
know why they believe what they believe. Yeah.
Exactly.
So sometimes you don't need to know everything about a topic. You just need to know a few things that inform your decision, and be willing to share those. And I be willing to bet you a lot of the time that they're not going to have anything to come back with you
Yeah.
because they don't know why they think what they think. So
Right. No, absolutely. I've always worked with like categories and lists. Have always kind of been my
mhm,
jam. And so like even I can even remember back when I like wasn't super like interested in politics and wasn't really well formed in it for sure. But like in my teenage years, like I
mhm,
always felt like the big three were like abortion, death penalty, and gay marriage were like my three
mhm,
topics that like I wanted to like learn more about and like always like kind of wrestled with. I was always
mhm,
pro-life, but I really struggled, especially back then with like the gay marriage stuff. Mainly not
mhm,
ever for the church, but really like as an American, and like I was kind of a little bit more libertarian at that point, and just kind of like,
mhm.
how do we like negate other people from doing what they want? And we could
Right.
do a whole nother podcast talking about those three things
That's a whole
probably,
nother
but
topic. Yeah.
yeah, and where we stand on it, where I stand on it now, where you stand on it, but um, I think I still kind of do that. My lists have just gotten a lot longer, obviously, but
Mhm.
you think about all these different areas, and it's like, okay, so I know that I'm weaker for sure on environmental issues, right? Like I don't know a
Mhm,
ton about that nearly as
mhm,
much as I'd like to, and it's a big one, so it's like people are really passionate about
mhm,
it. I'm not like hugely like formed on economics. My foreign
mhm,
policy is decent. It's not amazing. I definitely know a lot more American history than the average American, but still would like
right.
to really step my game up. But I know that I'm really strong in race. I'm really strong in
Mhm,
pro-life movement, gender theory, critical race theory, BLM, generally
mhm,
against like socialism and Marxism, like formed in those topics. So you kind of like develop
mhm.
like your strengths and weaknesses, right? And then like
Right.
literally in my yearly goals, I sit down and will write out like, what do I want to learn more about this year? Like which
Mhm,
areas am I going to learn more about? But I still think it's good for like everybody to kind of have their like strong suits, you know what I mean? Like your strong
mhm.
points. And then like you said,
Yeah.
like I got really excited because Dan Crenshaw's on like the committee for environmental issues. And so Jordan
Mm,
Peterson really wanted to ask him about it. So I'm listening to that part of the podcast where I just paused it.
mhm,
But I'm like going deeper into that, right? I wanted to learn more about the
mhm,
COVID stuff, which is why I'm reading the book about Anthony Fauci right now. And so like
mhm,
all that stuff, like there's so much to learn, right? And there's enough, you can be overwhelmed just trying to learn that much about the faith to evangelize. And then you throw in like politics and stuff on top of it. And it's like, man, there's a ton, but it's exciting
right.
and it is fun when you make
Mhm.
it a part of your day. But what are some of your favorite podcasts that you listen to on a regular basis?
Huge Daily Wire fan. I listen to a lot of Daily Wire, but I
Who's your
actually,
go-to within them?
it's funny. It goes back and forth. It always comes back to Ben Shapiro. I love him. And I think the reason is because he talks about a range of topics, whereas I feel
Mm-hmm.
like he talks about foreign policy, he brings in everything, whereas a lot of times I love Matt Walsh's personality, but he sticks really close to home with everything, which is great. But that's just like I like, having the world view. And I disagree with Ben Shapiro on some things, which almost makes it more
Mm,
interesting to me, because then it's kind of like, I wonder, and then I'll do my research to see if I'm right or he's right, kind of thing, or if I think I'm right anyway.
yeah.
He's kind of my go-to. And then I just recently started listening to the Joe Rogan podcast just because of the guests that
Mm,
he had on recently.
yeah.
I'm not sure he'd be an everyday listen for me, because a
Sure.
lot of his guests aren't that interesting to me. But
Yeah.
yeah, I love that he's willing to have the people on that nobody else is willing to have on.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of supporting that. So yeah, I think those are my go-tos. I will sometimes listen to the Unraveled podcast. I don't know if you know about that one.
I don't think
It's just
so.
two Catholic women that they just
Oh,
talk
okay.
about different topics, and um, that one's a good one. Without throwing anybody under the bus, there's a lot of Catholic women podcasts out there that I find that are not super helpful in any way that I can find. It's more like a
Oh,
girl
yeah.
chat, which is totally fine, but that's just not my thing. I just don't listen to them for that reason. So
Yeah.
that's not my thing. But But yeah, those are probably my go-tos. For the faith, I do more reading, I would say,
Okay.
just because I feel like I get a overview of topics, but when I read, I feel like I can get a lot more in depth with
Definitely.
things. So that's usually the direction I get with faith stuff. I just
That's
recently
cool.
read a book called The St. Gallen Mafia. I don't know if you've heard about that
I
book or
haven't.
not, but if you want to dive into the corruption in the church, that's a great place to start. So
Really?
there you go. There's my recommendation for
That's
that.
awesome.
It
I
talks a
love
lot
it.
about how the current pope got into where he is now. So it's very
Oh,
interesting.
that is
Yeah.
interesting. I will
Yeah.
definitely have to add that to my wish list, my Amazon wish
That's
list.
right. Put that on your list.
That's awesome. Yeah, I want to ask you more about if you have any other book recommendations. But first, you just hit an important topic, I think, when it comes to the other like female podcasts. I obviously don't want to dog anybody either. And I
Sure.
think this is true for a lot of people in the Catholic world. And part of why I love and I randomly, when I feel like you're getting a lot of hate, like try to send you like support messages, and like there's only a few people out there who
Appreciate
really,
that.
yeah, speak the bold truth. And it's funny how like even so many people with like bigger accounts will message me when I'm sharing, on some pretty hot topics and be like, man, thank you for saying that. And like
Mhm.
I do get frustrated with it because to me, if you feel that way and you feel passionate about it and you have the platform and you're not willing to say it, it's because you want to keep the platform. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
doesn't have anything to do
Yeah.
with like you not feeling that way or you not feeling like you should or your job. Like it's just like you just don't feel like
Dealing
you
with
don't want
it.
to lose your followers. You know what I mean? Like, and I get
Mhm.
that because it's
Mhm.
difficult, right? And it takes humility to like because it's fun, right? Like it'd be fun to have 10,000 followers, right? And more
Right.
people to
Yeah. Who
engage with
doesn't
them.
want 10,000 people to like you,
Yeah,
but
like it'd be awesome. But at the same
right.
time, I don't want 10,000 people following me that think I'm something I'm not, right? And so
Right.
that's more important to me. But I just
Mhm.
want to talk too about like the podcast. I think I'm so interested. I get, and it comes from men and women that'll be like, yeah, I want to start a podcast, or a friend wants to start a podcast. I'm like, oh, what's going to be about? It's going to be like the Catholic faith. And I'm like, dude, there's like 8,000 of those. You know what I mean? Like, I'm
Right.
not
Be
telling you
specific.
not to, but damn, man, like that's,
Mhm.
and it's an interesting thing, but that's like part of my drive to like do Seeking Excellence and talk about all these different topics, like a wide
Mhm.
range of things of like teaching people how to invest. Like Emily and
Yeah.
I doing like relationship issues and then talking about mental health with therapists and talking about,
Right.
fitness stuff with physical trainers. We have a fitness one coming out on Thursday. And it's like, I love
Mhm.
talking about these wide ranges because I think that the church doesn't talk about them enough. And it's like, be a voice for the
Mhm.
things that are very necessary that aren't getting talked about enough. Don't just come on and be another voice. Like, not that it's bad to post scripture passages or things like that, but for the love of the
Yeah.
Lord, you're not going to be like there's people out there, like you have Father Mike, you have Bishop Barron, like you have, Catholic Answers, like you have some deep theologians that are already
Mhm.
doing this stuff, Tim Gray, like you're not going to drown them out, right? But they're not willing sometimes
Right.
to talk about BLM or about emotional
Mhm.
health or whatever it is. So it's like there's so much need, and I just get, it's like everybody wants to go to the place that's kind of already oversaturated, and it's always like
Mhm.
this heady theology that doesn't even like actually approach or evangelize people
Not
who are,
practical, right?
yeah, like the people who are not interested in the faith aren't listening to it. It's like there's such a small audience of people who want to hear like theology talk twice a week.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like
Yeah. No, I
why go
totally
join
agree. I
that?
think we lost like the practicality somewhere along the way. And I actually think this goes back to like I hopefully your experience is better, but I've been to a lot of masses in my life, like well, like a lot. And I would say that I've heard very, very few homilies that were anything that was a practical application, right?
Right.
Not that they're bad, but it's a lot of like, Jesus says to love everyone. And it's like, okay, great. Like that's not
This word
bad,
actually
but
comes from
like,
the Greek,
yeah,
or
yeah.
so
Yeah,
this
like
part of
give me some
Israel is
okay, what
actually
am I
dry in the
supposed to
winter.
do here? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
like
like,
give me some
dog.
details here.
Yeah.
I've even been talking about that lately with like we won't dive into that whole topic, but the churches stand on how aborted fetal cells are used. Why have I never ever heard that from in a homily? I mean, that is
Yeah.
like a practical thing that people face in their real life. Like parents face that decision of what to do with their kids. And nobody ever talks about it. And I understand it's
Hmm.
uncomfortable and you're going to make some people mad, but we're supposed to talk about those things. And I do think it's filtered down from our leadership doesn't talk about them. So then we get real comfortable not talking about them
Yeah,
because no
absolutely.
no one's really doing it. But that's my call for the church militant, I guess. And I think you would be,
Yeah.
you would agree with that. It's like if they're not going to do it, then somebody does have to do it.
Right.
So,
And
you
it's
know,
like your choices are not just soft theology or talk about nonsense. you know,
Right.
like you talked about the other
Right.
podcast, it's just kind of like girl talk. And it's like, cool. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not mad at people to do that, but like, we need people to kind of fill the gap in like actually helping people to like have strong marriages and to, like you said,
Right.
share the importance of homeschooling. I know that's been one of your things recently, to share the
Yeah.
importance of like, or the dangers of birth control, like some of these things that like people
Mhm.
could dive into and like have a niche.
Yeah.
And like, you just see people are just like, sometimes it's laziness, sometimes it's fear, whatever it is. But do you have any other books before we wrap up here? Any other books that you want to recommend or share with anybody?
Um, I am current what I'm currently reading is a bunch of motherhood books, so I'm not sure that's like necessarily
That's awesome.
I don't know. I don't know how your audience is gonna we actually chose to, well, the goal is we're gonna try to do a home birth. So I'm reading a bunch of books right
Oh
now on
wow.
trying to prepare for that. We'll see. Speaking of not wanting suffering, I have a feeling no, that's not gonna
You got some, yeah, you
be
got some
super
coming up on
fun.
the
But
sketty.
yeah, that's right. But I'm reading a book called Made for This, and
Mm,
I believe her name is Mary Hasseltine, I want to say is the author, but she actually talks in there, and it was really impactful for me. She talks about how this is an opportunity for us to unite our suffering with Christ. So she's Catholic, and she relates the whole experience of birth to our faith, and it's been really really helpful for me because I tend to be the kind of person that's like, I can push through this, I can do it kind of
yeah,
thing. But like when you have something higher to relate it to, like, hey, I can unite this suffering with Christ, then it's like, okay, that just made a light bulb go off for me that there's more to this than just me pushing through the physical pain, because I think that I can do that, but let's do it with a purpose, right? So
absolutely.
anyway, so if there are any expecting moms out there that are listening, it's a great book. I totally recommend that one. So
That's so awesome. I love it. Yeah, no, I'm really excited for you. Emily and I are really excited for you and Alec. Yeah,
thank you.
what an exciting time, man. We're super
Yeah.
pumped. That's
And
very
how far
awesome.
are you from wedding day? Or are you
Right
guys, I don't know if you're saying what
right
your wedding
now.
date is
Oh
yet.
yeah. No, we're March 19th. So right now we're about 60
Okay.
days out. And I think
That's exciting.
this is likely going to come out in March. I'm looking at the schedule right now. So we're going to be like
Yeah,
9 days out when this comes out. So
that's awesome.
yeah, so it'll be super
Excited for you
close.
guys too. It'll be a really fun and challenging time for you. So
Oh yeah, you're not
lots of
kidding.
growth, lots of growth.
Yeah,
So
we were talking to some engaged couples last night. We were with a bunch of our friends, and Emily was
mhm.
talking to other engaged girls, and they were like, "Man," they were like, it's obviously stressful, but she was like, "How fun is it that you guys are like in that like last minute stressful time though?" You know what I mean? Like
Uh-huh.
where
Yeah,
it's like the
yeah,
end of
you're
the road
almost
for,
there.
yeah, it's like there's a bunch of stress that comes back around 2 months out, obviously, of just like
Right.
closing the loop on a lot of things. And she's like, "But that's
Yeah.
fun that you're that close though, that you're like thinking about the little stuff, you know."
The little stuff. Yeah.
Versus because you're in like the
Yeah.
reception phase and like church day, the dates
Mm-hmm.
and the guest list at the beginning, and it's like it's
Yes.
nice to be in like the small details of like who's gonna get the groomsman breakfast, like that's
Right,
what we're
right.
at now.
Things you didn't think about before that. Yeah.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
but
it is. It'll be, once you, and everybody tells you this, but once you get there, all those little things will kind of fade out, and it'll
right,
just be all about the marriage. So that'll be fun. You guys will have a great time. So I'm
yeah.
excited for you.
Well, thank you so much. Well, Bridget, again, thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully, we'll be able to bring you back on here soon to do another episode
I'd
together
love
because, yeah, I know. I think we have so many more things that we could have talked about that I thought about.
to.
Some days I wish I could be Joe
Sure.
Rogan and just do 3 hours because I'm like, we could have easily done,
Right.
sat
We're
and
not
talked
that
for three
popular
hours.
yet.
Yeah,
Someday,
no,
someday we'll
definitely
be
not.
that popular.
That's right. Yeah, God
Well, thank
willing.
you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I
Yeah,
think what you're doing is super important. Like we were talking about with the podcast, I love everything you do. So thanks for what you do too.
yeah. Thank you so much. So everybody, you can follow Bridget at According to Bridget. I'll have her information in the show notes, and we'll be sharing that and stuff on social media. So definitely encourage you to check her out. One of my favorite accounts on Instagram because you do the combo of faith and culture and politics and stuff like that. All the stuff that I love. So huge fan. And yeah, just want to encourage everybody out there. Hopefully you learned something today. And if you did, encourage you to share this with somebody else who you think might benefit from it. And just want to encourage you guys as well to know of our prayers for you and know that we're hoping that you'll join us in this fight of standing for truth, standing for freedom, standing for the faith, and just really start to discern and pray about the suffering that might be coming in your life and how God might be working in your life now to prepare you for that. And so as always, continue to fight hard and be your best.